Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. We are very excited to have all of you here with us today. Please introduce yourself in the chat and edit your Zoom display name to include your first and last name, as well as your local number. To edit your name, you can click the Participants tab, should be at the bottom of your screen, and select Rename. I am Navruz Baum. I'm recording secretary at Local 2325 and a paralegal in New York. I serve the UAWD membership as a member of the steering committee. Before we get started with our program, I want to lay out some quick community guidelines. If you can, please have your video on. We would love to see you all. We ask that folks remain muted unless prompted to speak so that we can limit interruption and any background noise. Please don't carry on detailed conversations in chat while members speak to avoid distracting speakers or other attendees. Any hateful, discriminatory, or intentionally disruptive speech or behavior will not be tolerated. If you violate these rules, you may be muted, and if it continues, we may remove you from the event. We are excited to have some new faces here today, so let me start out with a brief rundown on the history of UAWD. The members of UAWD are all UAW members who came together to demand changes in our union. Founding members set out in 2019 to reform a corrupted top-down UAW and lead the campaign for one member, one vote, and then to elect Shawn Fain. With the first ever UAW International Executive Board election, we ushered in a new era, electing leaders with a shared vision that champions more militancy and more working class power. Our newly elected leaders led an impressive Big Three strike after decades of service unionism and concessions, but the campaign was still run from the top down, and we ended up with a contract with significant shortcomings, things like attendance, temp conversions, and more. It became clear that having better leaders at the top doesn't transform our union alone. The debate over the Big Three contracts exposed a political divide within UAWD between some leaders who sought a more limited notion of reform and versus many of our core active members who believed that a militant democratic movement could only be built with a more political, expansive commitment to class struggle. A democratic, member-led strategy is the only path to rebuilding working class power that extends beyond the bargaining table for just wages and benefits, beyond organized labor alone, and builds real working class solidarity capable of taking on the billionaire class. We must empower our coworkers to realize that they are capable of exercising this power and to reclaim control over their lives by standing together and building up militant working class solidarity, powerful enough to take control away from the capitalist class. You can learn more about UAWD's member platform at the link, which we'll share in the chat shortly. If what you hear today lights a fire in you and you want to join us in that fight, we invite you to become a UAWD supporter at the link in the chat. As a member or supporter, you can become an active part of the incredible work underway. And now let me introduce our speakers today. Nevina PW is a committee person at Local 22, GM Factory Zero in Detroit. Nolan Tab is a 15-year UAW rank and file member out of Local 281 at John Deere. And Josh Trumley is a staff organizer in Region 9A. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So today's training provides a broad overview of class struggle, touching on our core principles and organizing methods. We're going to start in section one with a higher level view about the history of class struggle in the US and in the UAW that will include some analysis of the economic picture for workers today. In the second section, we'll share the fundamental principles needed to begin planning our own organizing strategy and some concrete first steps you can take back to your shop floor and move your coworkers to action. The aim is to keep today's to a little over 60 minutes and then leave some time after for those who want to extend the discussion. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to our first presenter, Nevina.
Cool. Thanks, Navruz. I'm so excited to be here. Real dedication and badass folks use your Sunday afternoon for this. So very excited. Okay, so let's cover the basics of class struggle methods. Our goal is to build class struggle unionism. What we mean by that is that we believe that our union struggles are part of a bigger class struggle conflict between the billionaire class, those who profit by exploiting us and controlling our economic and political system, and the working class, whose labor creates the goods and services that keep our society functioning. So we're only scratching the surface here, but we think it's important to lay down some definitions, and give everyone a way of explaining what's happening around us. So why are we here? The UAW is nearly a century old, but the workers it represents still don't have meaningful job security, work-life balance, or retirement security. Education workers are under attack and budgets are being slashed. Immigrant workers are threatened with ICE raids and deportations. The US continues to use taxpayer dollars to fund senseless wars abroad, backing the genocide in Palestine and more. But we also know that the situation today isn't natural or inevitable. It's designed to be this way, and that also means it can be changed. So, how do we win improvements at work, take control of our lives, change our own stagnant union, or build a better society? To understand this, we have to zoom out and look at the economic picture like we have here. This plot tells the story. The blue line is the unionization rate in the US over time. The red line is the fraction of income that goes to the top 1%. So when the red line is high, inequality is high. And when it's low, that means more wealth is being distributed to the bottom. The main thing you can take away from this is that when union density is high, inequality drops, and vice versa. And this is not an accident. Militant labor organizing achieves real gains for workers. But today, unionization is below 10%. There was a period, though, in US history where it was over 30% in the 40s and 50s. And it was during this period where workers saw some of the most significant improvements to quality of life in human history. So, labor unions played a major role in securing these improvements, forcing company bosses to share their profits with us, the workers. What led to this peak in union activity? The short answer is class struggle unionism. The labor movement of the 1930s was characterized by highly militant class struggle, with millions of workers engaged in tactics like walkouts, sabotage, sit downs, and massive strikes spanning multiple industries. Our unions fight in the 30s are a great window into this. So, key principles of class struggle organizing that workers in the 30s understood are one, it takes preparation and a plan to win. And two, when the boss cracks down, you actually escalate by bringing in more workers. I think almost all of us are familiar with the 1936 Flint sit down strike that established the UAW. Usually, the story is told that workers were fed up with conditions and sat down until they won recognition. Part of that is true, but there's also a lot missing. The first major thing is that years leading up to the strike, militant workers and community organizers held trainings, community events, and organized schools to prepare for fighting GM. GM would actually send spies to union meetings, so organizers had to meet at their own homes or community centers. And fortunately, today we have Zoom, like we're on right now. And the other major thing is that after General Motors workers occupied the Fisher body plant, management responded by issuing an injunction against their sit-down strike. But the workers' response was not to leave, but actually just escalate and took over a whole other plant, the Chevrolet plant number 4. So, if class struggle unionism helped us win big gains for workers like it did in the Flint sit down strike, why do we see a long decline in union power starting in the 50s? The short answer for that is that across the entire labor movement, unions started to pivot away from a confrontational posture and rather toward collaborating with management, cooperating with bosses instead of fighting them. And the UAW has something to do with this too, unfortunately. In 1950, UAW President Walter Reuther brokered the Treaty of Detroit with GM, abandoning the union's commitment to industrial democracy and worker control, and instead positioning itself as a collective bargaining body, negotiating more narrowly over wages and benefits. And as I'm sure many of us are familiar with, a bureaucratic grievance procedure then replaced more militant work stoppages to settle disputes. The agreement was made on the basis that workers and bosses can share in the corporate profits together. And for a while, profits were so high that the bosses were willing to give workers a larger slice of the pie. But in the 70s, that began to change. As the post-war economic boom ended, corporations were less willing to work with the unions and instead started laying off workers, moving production overseas, cutting wages, and busting unions. Unfortunately, most unions, including our UAW, didn't get the message and have spent the last 50 years trying to collaborate with bosses who have zero interest in working together. And I think we all here know us workers are the ones who have had to pay the price. So, how do we end up here? The pivot towards collaborating with corporations has led to wage stagnation, even while worker productivity has continued to increase. And meanwhile, the rich have gotten richer and the working class is deeper in debt. So, I'm going to pass it off to Nolan to share how we can fight that.
Thanks, Nevada. My name is Nolan Tabb, UAW Local 281, John Deere, Davenport, Iowa. And today I'm going to share a little bit about power because it's all about power. Class struggle unionism recognizes that at the end of the day, it's all about power. Who has it? Who doesn't? How we build it? How we use it? So, what is power? The power to do what? Right now, the capitalist class has nearly all the power. Our bosses have the power to control what gets produced, how much, how fast, what time we need to show up for work, how much we get paid, and who gets fired. The workers also have power, though it's largely unrealized power. We have the power to change this system and the power to run our workplaces ourselves. We can run our jobs without our bosses, but our bosses can't run the jobs without us. Class struggle is about harnessing that power. So, what is class struggle? How do we articulate and define class struggle? The UAWD Member Platform defines class struggle as, quote, a struggle between two classes in society whose interests are diametrically opposed. Workers versus capitalists. These two classes are the working class and the capitalist class, also referred to as the ruling class or the billionaire class. Working class people like you and me produce all the wealth through the value of our labor and the goods and services we create. Our work produces all the goods, services, technology, and ideas that make society function and generate profits. We survive by selling our labor, working in exchange for paid wages. Workers do not control production. The factories, tools, land, and equipment that makes industrial production possible. We don't control what gets built or how it's used or any say in the decisions that directly affect our lives. We also don't get to decide how much of the profit our labor produces will actually go to the workers who created it and if there will even be a profit at all. Instead, have the outcomes of our shared labor go back to our communities, our workplaces, and improve society as a whole. Corporate bosses control what gets produced, where factories are built, where factories are closed, as well as the power to decide what natural resources are extracted, the methods and rate of depletion, and at what cost the environment we live in. Returning only a small fraction of the value produced by workers, but only enough so we can survive and come to work the next day. Capitalists do not sell their labor or work to survive. They simply collect profits created from our labor and exploit workers. These classes have opposing interests. Capitalists want more value for lower wages, and they want total control. Workers want fair pay, respect, safety, and voice into decisions that affect our jobs and our lives. Simply put, workers can't get what we want, what we deserve, without fundamentally changing the system. And capitalists can't keep what they have if that system changes. The capitalists have all the power and benefits under the current system, and any changes to that power relationship will be an existential threat to the billionaire class. So it goes without saying that they will never give up any power voluntarily. These opposing interests can't be reconciled, and they can't coexist. That means we have to fight. So you learn what class struggle means. What about class struggle unionism? In short, class struggle unionism is an approach to labor organizing that recognizes workers and bosses as having fundamentally opposing interests and believes that bottom up, militant, collective action, such as workplace confrontations all the way up into strategic strikes, are needed to challenge capitalist power and take control of our working lives, starting on the shop floor and expanding to society as a whole. UAWD identifies some key pillars to class struggle unionism that we'll cover briefly. The first principle of class struggle unionism is worker control. I'm sure most of you have heard things like, well, they can't do that, or there's nothing in the contract that says they can't, and management can run their company however they like. We think that's bullshit. We think it doesn't have to be this way. And to win better lives for all workers, we simply have to stand together and fight for worker control. Worker control means those who do the work make the decisions. Day-to-day decisions like which workers we put on what job, what shift does everyone work, how many days off does everyone get, can you be forced to work mandatory overtime? If you're sick, are you allowed to go home from the plant? Control is not just about winning higher wages and other small concessions. We can exert control over the supply chains of the products we make to ensure materials are sourced in a way that doesn't harm other workers, and we can't be whipsawed against other workers around the world. For example, fighting for an international wage floor in UAW contracts with companies here in the US. One of the UAWD proposals for this summer's UAW Constitutional Convention does just that. And you can check it out in the link here in the chat. Control could also mean deciding what products are made. For example, should we make luxury vehicles for the elite that cost $150,000 and will inevitably plummet in demand, causing layoffs? Or perhaps something more equitable, like reliable and affordable vehicles for the working class that will benefit our communities. This is the foundation of our organizing strategy and why our approach is different from many other outdated organizing approaches. Ultimately, worker control is about who makes decisions in the workplace and in society as a whole. Workers should be the ones deciding what gets produced and making sure that what we make makes the world a better place. The second pillar is militancy. Militancy simply means that if something needs to be changed to improve worker lives, workers are ready to fight however necessary to force that change. That means being ready to be organized against the boss with actions big and small. Actions like filing a group grievance or getting a mass petition demanding change, or tactics such only as working bare minimum in accordance with your contract, similar to work to rule campaigns, as a way to slow production, or halting production, shutting it down in response to the bosses overstepping or endangering our health and safety. We wrote about how to use these tactics to go beyond the limitations of the grievance procedure in UAWD's publication, Daily Struggle. You can also find that link in the chat now. Flexing shop floor power and ultimately be ready to go on strike as a collective, which is our ultimate power, is another example. So, again, if the opposing interests of this class struggle can't be reconciled, then what choice do we have but to fight? The third pillar is working class solidarity, and maybe the most important. It is the recognition that workers from different countries, backgrounds, industries, orientations, genders, political beliefs, all workers have more in common with each other than they do with their bosses. Once that recognition is made, we understand that the interests of workers across all dividing categories are tied together. We must build power as an entire class. Bosses often use gender, race, ethnicity, and nationality to divide workers and pit them against each other. Class struggle unionism rejects those divisions. We recognize that our diversity is a strength, not a weakness, and we aim to build solidarity across the entire working class. And with that, I'll pass it back to Nev.
Cool. Thanks, Nolan. So if class struggle is what we need, what is the status quo for unions today? The sad reality is the culture is far more one of business unionism. Business unionism sees unions as a narrow tool to bargain only for economic demands while accepting management's total control over the workplace. It's the belief that we will win the most through positive relationships with management, that we are one big happy family, and it doesn't challenge the existence of billionaires. Does this sound familiar? It's absolutely familiar for me with how much I've seen union leaders just work with bosses. Business unionism, it obscures the class divide. It focuses on management cooperation. It engages in concession bargaining, which results in gains being small and usually temporary. It represents a small fraction of workers and ignores everyone else. And the worker capitalist power relationship will not ever see real substantial change. The grievance procedure is a revealing example of the difference between business unionism and class struggle unionism. Business unionism relies heavily on formal grievance channels, and some sectors even have union staff manage cases on behalf of the actual members. When handling a grievance, business unionism is often unresponsive, slow, and only pursues grievances they can win through legal arguments or buddy relationships with management. Class struggle unionism, on the other hand, uses grievances as an opportunity to build worker power through direct collective action. In class struggle unionism, all workplace issues are grievable, whether fully supported by the current contract or not. The formal grievance procedure is still used, but it's supported by direct action by rank and file workers. This approach often yields a resolution much faster, and I'll actually share an example of how we did that in my own local later in this training. But justice delayed is justice denied. So I'm going to pause here for a second and ask, based on that definition, what kind of examples have you all witnessed of business unionism in your local? So if you could put some examples in the chat, I can read them out loud. So yeah, so these are an example of like when you've seen your union rep talk more to your boss or come up with a deal with your boss, or you've seen your union leadership just narrow in on really specific things that don't impact everyone, in your local. Okay, so I see an example from Navruz. My local staff told us we needed to lower our salary demand in bargaining in order to seem more reasonable to management. Yeah, that is an awesome example. And then Josh shared, we won't win that grievance in arbitration, so there's nothing we can do about it. Right? And those are good examples of how there wasn't even a fight yet. So it's not like you even know. Okay, and Andrew said, our plant chairperson threatening people over using FMLA because management doesn't like it and saying we'll lose our work at our plant if we don't stop using our contractually and legally protected FMLA. Yeah, these are all great examples, and ones that I've painfully seen myself too. Well, if y'all think of more examples, please put them in the chat because I promise you it has definitely happened at all of our workplaces. Okay. So, where does our power come from? To understand how to build and use worker power, we need to understand where our power actually comes from. And we have a lot of it. We have enough to beat the bosses. I promise you, if we met them in a parking lot, we would very much outnumber the bosses right there. We just need to use it. So, our first source of power is our labor. All profits depend on us showing up and doing our work. We also have power in our numbers. There are a lot more of us, like I just said. And when we demonstrate that, it really scares them. Our third major source of power is our diversity. The workers as a group have a lot of different ideas, skills, knowledge, and connections, all of which can be leveraged to fight the boss. We win by collectively withholding our labor. By joining together and refusing to produce profits for the bosses, we're attacking the one thing they care about most and applying maximum pressure. So, to sum it up, class struggle is the conflict between two classes with opposing interests, workers and capitalists. Class struggle unionism is about worker control. We aim to shift power from bosses to workers. Militancy, to win real change, we have to fight the bosses. And solidarity, we have to work together across all borders and divisions. We won't be able to cover democracy and independence in depth, but these are two important additional pillars of class struggle unionism that you can read about in our member platform. And the ultimate goal here is to win independent worker power, to take control of our workplaces and the global economy. And the only way to do that is democratically as a collective. So I'll pass it to Josh to talk more about specifically how we can do that in our locals.
Awesome. Thanks, Nev. Hi, everybody. I'm Josh Trombley. I'm a temporary staff organizer out in Region 9A. I come out of the rank and file in the University of New Hampshire Graduate Employees Campaign, and that's where I do pretty much all of my work now. And so in this section, I'm going to talk about kind of our key organizing principles and concrete methods you can put into action to organize in your workplace based on this class struggle framework. We're also going to hear some stories from some experienced organizers who've been using these methods to explain how they play out in the real world. Um, I should say we're going to try to give you enough of a primer here so you can go out and get started applying some of these methods. But we don't have time to give, 100% of all the details you need to prepare for an organizing campaign, which can be a pretty complicated thing. So we are going to send out a study guide that'll be helpful. We'll have future trainings to give more details on different topics. You can also join the UAWD or join the UAWD organizing committee or reach out to have a conversation with one of our organizers to talk about your specific workplace or campaign. All right, so organizing starts small, but it has the potential to grow pretty quickly. Our main goal, what we would love to see is workers in control at the global and economic level. But of course, that's a pretty tall order. So we need to start at what we can reach and where we can gain power now, which often is out on the shop floor. Um, so on the shop floor organizing, what we're talking about is like tens to hundreds of workers organizing your coworkers to fight for things like job safety or better standards. From there, if you have militant shop floor organizing happening and succeeding, you could move on to organizing at the factory level, hundreds or thousands of workers. You can move on to bigger things like product commitments, work-life balance for all the workers, or environmental health and safety. From there, you can move up to the company or even the industry level, where you're talking about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of workers, and you can take on some pretty big fights over things like job security, living wages, setting wage floors for an entire industry, pensions, the social value from production, or even really global things like climate change. The point being that organizing starts small, but can have really big potential. But this training, we're primarily going to focus on the shop floor level because that's where most of the work that we're able to do is happening now. So I just want to pause for a second and ask for folks. So we're going to talk about like how do you organize at the shop floor level? How do you win on important issues? So I'd like to ask if folks can throw in the chat, like what are some of the issues that you're running into in your workplace that you would want to see changed? Like if you could wave a magic wand and change one or two things about your working conditions, what would those things be? Like what is the bullshit that you're dealing with at your job that you would want to change? So I'll just give a few minutes for folks to throw that in the chat now. Awesome. Seeing the pace of work. Yeah. Workload. Yeah. I feel that one. Zach, health and safety. Thanks. Pay policy and benefits. Mass layoffs following a lot of mandatory overtime. Yikes. Work-life balance, 30 for 40. Supervisor bullying. Pay equity. Yeah, worker input for big decisions. That's huge. Awesome. Yeah, keep throwing them out because I'm going to try to make this a little more interactive by referring back to some of these things as I go through here. Removal of benefit tiering. Yeah, that would be nice. All right. So, all right, we have all these issues, right? Bullying from supervisors, layoffs, mandatory overtime, speed ups. But what do we actually do? How do we actually change this? So if you're just one worker on the shop floor, there's very little that one person can actually do, but what one person can do is start to organize. The power to solve these problems and make these changes is all around us. You're surrounded by your coworkers who have their own problems and their own issues, their own ideas, questions, and abilities, and those things are the source of power. So one worker has very little power to change things, but a lot of coworkers working together have a lot of power in the workplace. So when we say organizing, what even is that? I know it means different things to different people across sectors. The first definition here is a bit of a word salad, but it covers I think the breadth of what this means to us. Organizing is a concrete plan to empower the majority of workers to become active participants in the collective struggle for worker control. So that's a lot. I think I like this definition from our own Gene Duchemin better. The best way for me to organize is to teach these guys how to fucking fight. That's how I think about it. Is like what we're doing. Ultimately, if the workers, like Nev said, if the workers were to step out into the parking lot with the bosses, the workers would win that fight. So what we need to do is get the workers organized so that we can take advantage of that power and win the change that we want. So there are some general principles that we operate from when we think about class struggle in terms of organizing. First is that you and your coworkers are the drivers of change. Our power comes from working together with our coworkers. Our power doesn't come from our bosses, the government, from union staff, or even elected union leaders. So you and your coworkers must be the drivers of change, and you must be the ones to actually take action. That means that the work, like the labor and logistics that go into organizing, need to be done primarily by you and your coworkers. And we like to say the union only works if you do. The next principle is rank and file leadership. So you and your coworkers need to be the ones doing the work, but you also need to be the ones leading the way. Obviously, you can get support from staff, get support from elected leaders, or even outside experts, but the core leadership must be independent and fully connected to the rank and file. In some cases, as people have probably seen, elected union leadership can even be hostile to shop floor organizing because they think it's going to screw things up and make the boss mad. So we need to have an independent leadership structure so we can face that reality. So when we talk about organizing as we go throughout this training, it's the rank and file leaders who are actually doing that organizing work, making the plans, talking to their coworkers, and coordinating actions. The next principle is collective action. As we said earlier, our power comes from our numbers, our diversity, and our labor. So we can exercise all three of those sources of power together by joining together with our coworkers to disrupt production. Without our labor, there are no profits. So that's a major threat to our bosses. And winning significant demands requires majority participation in these actions, ultimately. When the bosses see the majority of workers taking action together, it really scares them and can get a lot done. So we need a solid, concrete plan to get to a majority. We need a plan to engage with all the workers in the workplace and move them to take action. And that also means that all of the workers in the workplace matter, and what they need and what they want matters as well. So decisions, as much as possible, need to be made democratically by you and your coworkers together. The next principle is something we call strategic escalation. Um, when we talk about collective action, ultimately the most powerful thing we can do is something huge like a supermajority strike where 90% of the workers go out on strike and stay out until they get what they want. I think most of us know that if you tried to do that, like if you're starting from scratch and you try to do that from day one, 90% of the workers are not going out on strike. So we need to start somewhere. So we start small and we build up. We do this with what we call strategic escalation, generally starting from tactics that maybe are a little less risky, a little less confrontational, and may include fewer workers. But then as we build power throughout the campaign, moving upward along that escalation to actions that are bigger, riskier, put more pressure on the boss, and include more of the coworkers in the workplace. An example of this would be something called a fire your boss campaign. You have a bad supervisor who's bullying you, and you want to get rid of them. So you might start with something like a petition or a letter signed by everyone in your department saying, this person's bad. We want them gone. We want a new supervisor. You might follow that up by taking a bunch of people and marching into the CEO's office with that petition saying, hey, this supervisor hasn't been fired yet. What's going on? We've got 200 people who've signed this letter. You might then escalate further, get more people involved, and conduct a walkout, maybe a one-day walkout, or like even just a 1 hour walkout, whatever people are ready for, and escalate up the chain from there, continuing to escalate until you get what you want. An important component being you might win halfway through this process before you expect to, but ultimately, like you expect a lot of these things to fail. So having a plan like this can help prevent becoming discouraged when the first thing we do or the second or the third thing we do doesn't actually work, and we can just keep escalating. So how do we actually make that happen? Ultimately, to make any of this stuff happen, we have to get the bulk of the workers, the bulk of our coworkers involved. We do this through the organizing process. This is a little bit abstract, but we're going to talk about make this more concrete as we move through the training. So if we have to get the majority involved, then what the majority wants, their ideas, their wants, what they're ready to do about it really matters. That's what we need to base everything on. So first, we have to go out, we have to talk to our coworkers, we have to collect their ideas, find out what issues are important to them, and talk them through like what taking action might look like. Then, with a small or large leadership team, we need to take all those ideas, all the stuff we've learned from talking to our coworkers, and coalesce that into a concrete plan to actually go from where we are to winning our demands. And finally, we need to engage the workers, our coworkers, in the actual struggle. So we need to take that plan, bring it back to our coworkers, and recruit them to take action. When we go out, this is something we call like the worker blob or worker tendencies. When you go out and talk to your coworkers, obviously you don't expect 100% of your coworkers to just like be totally on board with what you're doing. Like say you're trying to get your supervisor fired, you're going to run into different people with different ideas. It's helpful for us to lump our coworkers into three broad categories when we're thinking about this. The first people are your automatic supporters, the people who are basically all they need is a conversation saying, here's what we're fighting for, here's what we're doing, and they're going to be on board, either on board just passively or actually jumping in and taking action. On the other side, I'm sure you've run into folks like this. There's people we'd call hostile. These are people who are going to be, whether out of fear or out of ideology or closeness with the boss or whatever, are going to be totally against shop floor organizing. They may just refuse to get involved at all, or they may actively work against you. The biggest group, though, the majority of people are going to be in the middle. They're either going to be totally neutral, totally uninformed, disengaged, maybe lean one way or the other, but not strongly. Importantly, those are the most important people for us to be thinking about, and those are the people we ultimately need to move in order to actually have the power to beat the boss. Our strategy for doing that relies on activating the supporters to move the middle. It basically relies on the idea that a small leadership team is going to have a lot of trouble moving the majority of coworkers into struggle. But if you can move those supporters to really take action, and especially to take action openly, they can use their connections and relationship and presence in the workplace to move their coworkers who they're more connected to. And for the hostile people, we generally say you either ignore them if you can, or if they're actively working against you to the point that you can't ignore them, you outnumber them and isolate them. So we don't spend a lot of time debating with them or fighting them. It can be counterproductive. Okay, so those are kind of a little bit more abstract principles about organizing, but how do we actually put those into practice? Okay, there is a concrete method for organizing that has been tested in the field and shown to work over and over. And that generally involves these 5 steps, though you kind of end up doing all these things at the same time. And the first is building a team, then mapping your shop so you know who people are and where they are, talking to your coworkers, taking the ideas you get from your coworkers and turning them into a plan, and finally, taking action together. And we're going to talk about each of these things in detail through these slides. But it's important to remember that this isn't exactly a stepwise process, though you generally do need to start with building a team and mapping. You kind of end up doing all of these consistently throughout any organizing campaign. Okay. First step is building a team. The reason this is always the first step and you're always doing this is because lone wolf organizing, going out and trying to just make shit happen in the workplace all by yourself, generally doesn't work super well because one person, like we said, has a very limited power. So you need a team, even a small team, to start talking to your coworkers and making plans. You generally will start with the most supportive coworkers, the people who are ready to jump in, recruit them, start planning with them, start getting them activated. And importantly, when we say leaders here, you're building a team of rank and file workers. You may have allies who are staff or who are elected leaders, but we're primarily talking about rank and file workers. This is a big subject, so we will have another training in the future to talk about like why leaders matter, what even is a leader, what do leaders do, how to recruit and develop leaders, and how to structure things. But for today, we're going to focus on a concrete example of what this looks like. So I'm going to pass it over to Estefania, who's going to talk about an example from their sectoral bargaining in 23-25.
Well, I'm Stephania. I'm a paralegal and a rank and file member with Local 2325, like Josh said. Um, our local is an amalgamated local representing legal service workers in New York. And last year, we took on what was our biggest organizing project in our history, which was sectoral bargaining. Um, for a little bit of context, while all legal service representation in New York City used to be done by one single unionized organization, about 30 or so years ago, the mayor, who didn't like the power and the practice that those workers had of going out on strike and stopping the courts from functioning, decided that he would change the entire funding system to allow for the creation of a bunch of non-union legal organizations. This ultimately led to this race to the bottom as all of these new orgs began to compete against each other, whipsawing workers, lowering working standards, just like they do in manufacturing and auto and other industries to try to get more funding from the city. And so for the past like 30 or so years, my local has spent that time trying to get back to where we were in that moment. And over the last few years, we were really successful in not only getting our union density back up, but we organized so that our contracts would expire at the same time, so that instead of being pitted against each other, we could try to bargain together and go out on strike together again. But it's one thing to say we're going to do this big thing and another thing to actually do it, right? We had this big project in front of us to organize over 2,000 members from over 10 shops to unite on demands together and be ready to walk out if we didn't get them. And this wouldn't work if it was just a bunch of union staff or union bureaucrats at the top telling us what to do. We needed mass rank and file participation and buy-in. We needed people who were ready and willing to take bold action to get what we wanted. But this was new for our local, right? We had never coordinated our bargaining before. We had never coordinated our actions before. And we were headed into sectoral bargaining with a lot of members never having gone on strike, never having organized a picket or a petition, and a lot of members haven't even heard of what sectoral bargaining was. And so this is where our kind of powerhouse organizing team came in, which we called our sectoral contract action team or our super cat. Because if we wanted to pull this off, we needed to have rank and file members at each work site who were excited about the vision we had, who were willing to organize and put it into practice, and who were able to talk to their coworkers and bring other people into the project as well. And so through public calls at shop meetings, through dedicated one-on-one conversations, we went from this organizing body, which was less than 10 people, which represented maybe a third of the sectoral shops, to having dozens of members meeting every single week to coordinate our contract campaigns, to update each other about where our membership was at, who were talking to their coworkers to build that excitement and that buy-in, and who were also leading their own shop level organizing teams as well. And so through this Supercat, we were able to successfully lead every single sectoral shop into a successful strike authorization vote. We're able to lead about 1,000 members to go out on strike at the same time. And we were able to change the reality of what was possible for our local, which was extremely exciting. And I think really maybe the first step in what we hope to be bigger and bigger organizing projects in the future.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, that was a very cool process to witness from the outside. So congrats on that and great work. Um, so you've got a team in place. You've built your super cat. You've built your team. Um, Now what? Well, you ultimately need to be able to reach as many of your coworkers as possible. And in order to facilitate that, we focus a lot of time and attention on what we call mapping. Basically, you need to know who your coworkers are, where they work, how you can get in contact with them, and who they're connected to, who they trust, who they work with, so that you know who's best to reach out to them. In practice, this often involves a spreadsheet that looks a lot like this one with names, contact information, support assessments. How are they a supporter? Are they hostile? Are they neutral? Records of who is connected to who, and which leader, which person on your team is assigned to talk to which coworker. Most of the work done in leadership meetings, honestly, involves just going through lists like this, checking in on assignments, who talked to who, how did those conversations go, who needs to follow up, or who needs to still be tracked down, etc. Once how to get in contact with your work coworkers, how to find them. Like this is what it's all about: is worker to worker communication, really sitting down and talking to people to help understand their issues and how to get them involved. Um, we're of course going to have a future training on this. If you've done any kind of organizer training before, it was most likely an organizing conversation training. There's a reason this is the main focus of most organizing trainings. But today we're not going to be able to go into like all the details of what this communication needs to look like in your campaign, because a lot of it can depend on exactly what you're trying to go out and accomplish. But there are some general things, and that's that there are kind of two broad categories of communication with coworkers, and that's one-on-one communication and group communication. We put a lot of emphasis on one-on-one communication because this is where you really get like high quality conversations. They take more effort because you really have to go track people down, and they take time to talk to every worker one-on-one, but it's really worth it because this is how you build relationships with your coworkers, how you move the people who maybe are more in that middle category, how you really sit down and talk them through like the things they care about, and how you can work together to accomplish that, and how you get information about the workplace. Group meetings and group communication is also extremely important for a lot of reasons. It's lower effort. You can get a lot of people in a room at once and deliver information. It tends to be a little more surface level communication, not quite as deep. But it's also where like democracy happens. It's really best for engaging people who are already at least somewhat supportive, because they're the ones who are actually going to show up if they're invited to a meeting. And it's great for taking supporters and moving them into more of like a leadership, more of an active role. And group communication at every level, whether it's with your coworkers, you're just the rank and file, whether it's with other leaders, is really important too, because it builds this sense of like collective action. The whole idea is that we're working together to accomplish something. So group communication as a regular practice is important for building that kind of collective feeling. Primarily, the purpose of this communication is to understand like what issues people care about, to give them the information that they need about what's going on, and to ultimately move people to take action. And most of that comes from one-on-one conversations, so that they're slightly more important. I think slightly more of a focus of organizing than group communication, but you do need both. So we need to make a concrete plan to reach as many workers as possible one-on-one. And to talk about like some of that communication and where that can ultimately lead, I'm going to pass it off to Nolan.
Thanks, Josh. A lot of really good information there. And one thing about the organizers that you're hearing from today, organizers within UAWD, the UAWD membership, is that we're not just reading this into a book and then regurgitating it onto a Zoom. These are things that we're actually putting into practice in our own shop floors. So at Local 281, John Deere in Davenport, Iowa, my home shop, our rank and file power is in full swing. We've been working for more than a year to build a bottom up movement with this method of organizing that we're sharing here today. starting with one-on-one, member-to-member communication and conversations about what issues my coworkers are ready to engage with. Although bread and butter issues like pay and benefits are but one piece of the equation that impact workers' standards of living and our work-life balance, it's a big piece. So it makes perfect sense that how we are compensated has become a constant conversation on our shop floor. For the vast majority of us at Deere, the way we are paid has been dictated by the company's incentive structure known as Continuous Improvement Payment Plan, or KIP for short. This pay structure is divisive and anti-union in nature. KIP is akin to sort of goodwill hunting formula strewn across a giant chalkboard, and we'll share you here just to get a little glimpse of it. The formula for calculating our compensation confuses even the most mathematical minds, and not by accident. It's also driven by continuous improvement, also known as lean manufacturing. It is designed to force workers to do more work for equal or lesser pay over time. It pits workers against workers, departments against departments, and ties all of us to management's mismanagement. Things like new product ramp ups, material flow, and engineering flaws all impact our pay standards and our annual income. If we, as shop floor workers, aren't intimately knowledgeable and constantly engaged with management's plot problem solving on a daily basis, we lose money, potentially swinging our annual earnings tens of thousands of dollars. And instead of addressing our coworkers who need time off for work, for family matters and FMLA medical issues, it sounds something like, "Hey," it should sound something like, "Hey, I hope everything's okay for you and your family. Take all the time you need. We'll see you when you get back. Let us know if you need anything." Instead, it's usually something closer to, "What a lazy piece of shit. Always gone, always taking FMLA, and always costing me money because people don't want to show up to work." Why? Because if production is negatively impacted by all of these daily situations, it's simply a result of doing business. Our pay suffers. To change that, we're organizing our coworkers to abolish KIP. We'll be standing a majority in 2027 contract negotiations, demanding that we be paid straight wages. No formulas, no impossible operating standards, no management bullshit. This is the company's current process for addressing issues with KIP. So let's throw that slide up there. You see on the side there. At Deere, most of us at Deere make north of $90,000 a year. Though our base rate of pay after making the top 5 year progression is in the ballpark of $27 an hour, unless you're skilled trades. That's the impact KIP has and makes up that difference. But at 2,080 hours a year, or just 40 hours a week, that's over $93,000 a year. So we already make that money. It's just structured differently, so that we workers are left fighting amongst each other and tied to all of management's problems that we get left to fix. Framing that perspective is much easier to understand and resonates with most production workers in my shop and at other Deere local shops in our master agreement that make up more than 10,000 workers. A stark contrast from the company's line, taken by joint company union leadership, who only know how to lead with fear and say, "Oh, you really think the company's going to give you a $20 an hour raise?" The same company who clears nearly $10 billion a year in profit and who already pays us that amount of money. It's a difference in structuring, a difference in framing the narrative. With our rank and file website, we created a little over a year ago that we'll drop here in the chat for people to check out. We started with a survey that illuminated the anger and frustration our coworkers harbor about KIP. And now, today, as those of us leading this bottom-up effort are on the cusp of petitioning for recognition as one of the first ever UAWD chapters, we're in full steam ahead of our triennial elections and critically important contract negotiations. And it all started with a simple conversation with our coworkers. That's the power of one-on-one, member-to-member communication. With that, I'll pass it back to Josh.
Awesome. Thanks, Nolan. All right. So now you've got a team in place, you've talked to coworkers, you've got the shop mapped out. You need to make a plan. Like you've talked to coworkers about what issues are important to them. So the first and maybe most important piece of making this plan to win is picking the right issue to fight on. We say you need to pick an issue that's widely felt and deeply felt. That's pretty intuitive. It basically means you need to pick an issue that a lot of people care about and that a lot of people care about a lot, that they care about enough to actually potentially take risks and take action to do something about it. Also, it needs to be an issue that's winnable. It's valiant to fight a losing battle sometimes, but we want to pick something that we at least have the potential to win, something that the boss can potentially say yes to. but also not too easy because we want to kind of raise people's expectations, raise that level of struggle. So we want something that's worth fighting over. Then you need to choose an action, which we'll talk about at the next slide in a little bit. But ultimately thinking about, are the workers ready to take this action? Will this action pressure the boss? Will it actually do anything? And will it help us build power and get more workers engaged in the struggle? Finally, you need to think about like some of the logistics, like setting benchmarks, assigning tasks, holding each other accountable for the tasks that we take on, and mapping, like we talked about before. As we said, collective action, especially majority collective action, is how we pressure the boss and actually win the changes we want. There are a lot of different types of actions. It would be very difficult to go through all of them here. We'll hear a little bit about some of those possibilities. But ultimately, actions need to do two things. They need to engage a lot of workers, hopefully the majority of workers, in the struggle for change, and they need to put pressure on the boss to make the changes that you're demanding. As I've said multiple times, getting a majority to engage in action is the most effective, but minority actions are also really important, especially minority actions that have majority support, or as you're kind of building up that escalation ladder, understanding that the first couple actions you do might ultimately not be majority actions because you're building up that base. And so I'm going to talk more about like what these actions look like in practice. I'm going to pass to Nev to give a few different examples. Take it away.
Cool. Thanks, Josh. Yeah, I'm going to share two examples. So, Local 22, our plant is an electric vehicle plant in Detroit. It's a GM plant. And in the UAW GM national agreement, there's a really disgusting clause that says that if management's launching a new model, they can work us however many hours they want to. So in 2024, when they were launching the electric Hummer, they were having us work 6 to 7 12-hour shifts almost the whole year of 2024. And second shift, which I was on, is 5 p.m. to 5:30 a.m., right? So you just worked a 12-hour shift. It's pitch black outside. A lot of people were actually falling asleep at the wheel while driving home. And it got to a point where one member, Ashton Smith, was actually killed, fell asleep at the wheel while driving home. And I think it just tapped into just such a shared feeling in the plant that these hours were literally taking away our lives. It was taking away people's time from being with their kids. A couple of my friends would be like, I'm making all this money, but what's the point if I don't get to actually see my kids? And so we already had developed like a crew at Local 22 wanting to have a stronger union. And we were like, we have to respond to this. Like our plant of almost 4,000 people is pissed off about this. And so we created a petition where we called on management to give us a third shift, to spread the mandatory overtime across actually 3 shifts. And so a lot more workers would also be hired for that. And we called on our union leadership to fight for this by opening up our local living agreement, calling for strategies like health and safety strikes, which are the kinds of strikes you don't have to wait for contract bargaining to happen over in the big three. This is what Josh just shared on the screen is our petition. And we ended up getting like 850 signatures. And it was really like, our team took shifts of flyering at the gates and it was electric. Like I was almost like overwhelmed by how many people wanted to sign the petition. So we did this by again using our core team and actually making this petition together, coming up with a plan. We used Canva, which is like a free graphic design software, really easy to use to make your own literature. And we also used a Google form to collect info. So did we win our demands? No, we didn't. And, I think that that was like a hard thing to swallow, but it was also a really important building block, right? We got 850 people's contact information, people who have not been organized in our plant at all, who signed it. We had a question of, do you want to learn more about UAWD? And about half of them said they did. And then most importantly, we gained about 5 new core members to our rank and file crew. And so I think that, again, it's a really good example, in my opinion, of like we didn't get almost anything we wanted that was in our demands, but it was so important as a first major action to then actually go to another, my second example, which happened around 6 months later. By that point, a bunch of us had gotten elected as union reps, and I was representing the battery department in the plant. And so imagine we got overworked such an insane amount of hours in 2024, and then 2025 experienced rolling layoffs like month after month. And it got to a point in the battery department, people who weren't laid off were all of a sudden being told to do two jobs at once while their union brothers and sisters are getting laid off. And so my members were just so pissed off about this. And we worked together. We knew that if we filed grievances, it wouldn't mean shit unless we actually had action backing it up. And so we decided to do a work to rule campaign. This team was about like 25, 30 people. And so what a work to rule campaign means is that you do work exactly as management's rules say it is, nothing more and nothing less. So, for example, when bosses assigned UAWD supporter Alex to a second job, he immediately handed in his walkie-talkie from his first job, physically making it impossible for management to make him work two jobs at once. Others challenged management on job descriptions, forcing them to prove on paper that their orders were legitimate. And management found themselves scrambling and actually trapped by their own like GM rules. And we were doing all of this, just like Josh's example, group meetings. We were using group meetings to come up with these plans. And I remember in one of the group meetings, a member Andrea stood up and she was like, they're going to come after us if we also escalate. So we need to cross our I's. We need to, or sorry, dot our I's, cross our T's. Don't be late. Don't use your phone. And then actually more confident members, we also asked them to like stand up in a meeting to be like, hey, those of you who are more scared in this room, look at these leaders. You can go and talk to them, ask them, share with them if you're scared about our group grievances. And I think at least like six people in this team of 20 like stood up as the confident leaders. And it was electric. People feeling like we could actually change stuff together. And so the other thing we did, then there's a day where I had the meeting as a union rep for, higher level management over the grievances, and everyone wore red, and we won all of our grievances. And it was only happened because members were on the shop floor taking action because we were using our strong relationships with each other. We were meeting in groups. We had a plan that if management retaliated against them, I would show up as their union rep right away. And most importantly, people won confidence to see that we can actually win what we need to when we put our foot down in a physical and confrontational way in the plant. And it also gained us about three or four more UAWD supporters. And now we have developed a UAWD chapter at Local 22. And so I think those two examples are really useful together because the first one was a big plant-wide one. We learned a lot from it. We didn't win everything, but we learned a lot and we got more members that then led to us having, again, a smaller place in the plant, but really concrete wins where we literally got jobs back that management had tried eliminating. And I remember we even had some skilled trades friends in the plant give us advice and even come to like a Zoom meeting with us to help give us advice on how to do it. So I think any effort to really tap into what people are so pissed off about in the plant and have a concrete confrontation with it helps us win things I don't think we even know we're capable of yet.
Thank you for those great stories, Nev. Always inspiring to hear that stuff happening in my workplace. I know we're struggling, but it's always great to hear that we're not alone and it's happening all across the UAW. So having heard all that, I have just one question for everyone here. Are you in? Do you want to be part of a militant group of organizers across the UAW? Do you want to develop your skills long term to know how to fight from the shop floor and beyond? Do you want to be part of the legacy of class struggle in the UAW and lead the movement for change today? We'd love to have you as a UAWD supporter or member, and you can join at the link in the chat. We also have a publication with news about struggles across the UAW called Daily Struggle. You can subscribe at the link in the chat so you'll get an email when there's a new story. You can also order hard copies for yourself and your coworkers at the same link, and we'll send them to you for free. And with that, we're going to open it up for for questions, for thoughts. If you would like to have if you have a question or like to get off mute, please just raise your hand and I can call on you. Or you can also put your question in the chat if you don't want to get off mute. I'm seeing a question in the chat. Is membership available for pre-contract units? Absolutely. Workers who are currently bargaining their first contract are with the UAW are more than welcome to join UAWD, and we'd love to have you. In fact, we have a number of UAWD members who are do not have a first contract yet.
It looks like the other Josh is raising his hand physically.
Go ahead, Josh. Take it away.
Sorry about that. I'm doing this on my cell phone. It's a little bit tougher. So I just kind of wanted to give an example that you guys were just talking about at my local. Um, we had a management that was getting pretty hostile with a lot of the workers. They weren't allowing any vacation time. We were going through multiple critical statuses at the time, which were 90 days straight, no days off, 7 days a week. And skilled trades came out and we came out with a little bit of a plan, and it was just work to rule, just like you guys had said. And we utilized the health and safety aspects of the rules. And coming from a part supplier, we were able to basically shut production down just by following safety protocols. We would do changeovers that could take 2 hours, and those changeovers sometimes took over a day. So, I mean, it really hemmed them up. And plant managers came in and they said, "What do we got to do to make this start to work again?" And everybody just pointed at the guy in the corner, said, "Get rid of him," and he was gone that day.
That's great, Josh. And yeah, I think that really just demonstrates the power we have when management just needs to keep things running. That's their priority, and when we can gum that up, there's no limit to what we can demand and what we can win. All right. I think we're gonna close it out with Andrew. You have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just want to say that's a really exciting story, Josh, and I'd love for others to share them either now or let us know. As Navrouz mentioned, Daily Struggle is a publication that's by UAW members and for UAW members, and we've featured a lot of really exciting shop floor struggles in our pages so far. One of them is a fight that a few folks at a Lear seating facility led, some of whom are UAWD members, and we've had a few others. So Josh would love to, talk to you about that fight. We've got an interview coming with folks from a GM parts distribution facility about the battles they've had getting some of their bosses fired. So yeah, it's really exciting to hear these stories, and we'd love to be able to feature them so that more people learn about the great sort of militant battles going on.
Heather, I'm seeing your comment in the chat. If you're able, can you get off mute and just say what kind of workplace you're at, or put it in the chat?
Sure. I work for like the Department of Cannabis Control in California, and yeah, we just have management that's not very communicative with like expectations and stuff, and so we're going through a reorganization, and I don't, our management hasn't really been through like bargaining, it seems like, with our union because our agency is so new. So they're like a 4-year-old agency, and they're kind of just flying by the seat of their pants, and yeah.
Yeah. Many of us don't work in kind of sectors where it's kind of less clear what the class struggle is and how they're profiting off of us and therefore what our leverage is. And I'll say personally, I'm a paralegal. I work in legal services, and that's definitely the case for me. But the same fundamental concepts I think still hold true in that our jobs are essential to keeping society running because they exist, right? If the ruling class didn't think that uh, our jobs need to exist in order to keep society running, then they wouldn't be paying us and they wouldn't have our jobs. And so when we don't do our jobs, when we withhold our labor, that can still have a big impact and that can still build leverage. Now, I think in terms of specific workplaces, we're going to have to kind of analyze and examine and think about how exactly can we go into the works. And often that might not be just like, it's certainly not going to be a single worker. It might not even be like a certain department. It might need to be larger than that. But at whatever that scale is or whatever the choke points are, there's going to be ways where we can still go into the works and that's going to be our leverage. And in terms of not having millionaire or billionaire CEOs and owners, I mean, we still deserve, as workers, no matter what work we're doing, we deserve to have good conditions. We deserve to have good wages. We deserve to have health and safety and good schedules. And in terms of the value it's going to pay for that, I think sometimes we just have to look a little larger. I work for a small nonprofit that on paper maybe doesn't have a lot of profits, but it's all paid by the city. And if we look at the city budget, New York City has a lot of money, and there's a lot of choices about where that money goes. A lot of money goes to subsidies for corporate landlords. A lot of money goes into private contractors, things that where there are millionaires, and there's millionaires on my board of directors. There's people from private equity and big law firms, and so kind of what my nonprofit has on paper is a little misleading, and I think it's a little bit of a shell game sometimes. So I think that in certain sectors, especially like public sector or nonprofits, maybe we have to do a few extra steps with this analysis. But a lot of the same class struggle concepts and where our leverage comes from still absolutely holds true. But the most important thing in terms of figuring that out is talking to your coworkers. And so I know that you all have a good crew over there. And so you all are going to be able to figure out the answers to those questions better than I can.
Thank you.
Good luck. All right. I'm seeing in the chat, he's probably a billionaire, the California governor, and management act like they don't know worker issues, play dumb, or don't care. Absolutely. I see all the time that management kind of tries to play dumb and say, "Oh, sorry, that's out of our control." And then we go on strike and all of a sudden they find a way to that it is in their control. All right. I think we're going to close it out there. Thank you so much for dedicating your Sunday afternoon to this. It was really amazing to have all of you here. Really great to hear everybody's examples and everybody's thoughts. If you like what you heard, please stay in touch. We shared links to subscribe to Daily Struggle. We shared links to join UAWD, and we'd love to have you as part of this project.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it in the conversation. Glad to be in the struggle with y'all.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for turning out.